We're going to go ahead and get started. To everyone who's joining, just want to say thank you so much for taking some time to take part in this presentation. My name is Joel Worrall, and I'm the Senior Director of Open Source for New Relic. And this topic is on a concept I've been doing a lot of learning on myself over the last decade that I've titled Contributor-Centric Systems. First off here, because I'm presenting, I'm obviously going to offer up this safe harbor slide. There's actually not that much in this content that's related specifically to the work I'm doing day to day at New Relic, except when it comes to some of the things that we baked into our open source website, but always good to make sure that I cover all the legal stuff. Okay, so quickly, a moment about me. So I currently operate as the Senior Director of Open Source at New Relic. So I'm responsible for the Open Source Program Office, as well as a number of initiatives inside the organization that are all focused on moving more of our technology into the open and helping set practices for the way all our engineering teams are thinking about how they engage with open source. So I run an engineering team and do product management work there, as well as deal with our OSPO. Previously, I actually worked on the go-to-market side in the organization in a group called New Relic Labs. But my background before I came to New Relic was actually heavily focused in the nonprofit space. So I spent the last decade of my life in running technology and marketing in a nonprofit setting. And then after that time, excuse me, actually running technology in a marketing firm that was focused on serving nonprofits. So I've been an engineering manager and also I've been the head of a marketing department. I've been a solution architect. I've taught adjunct. I'm a developer. I still try to write code on a weekly basis and really love it. It's like the center of the thing that brings me most to life. But have found a lot of my work at the intersection of nonprofit and open source, including in being an open source founder of a project that took off about 6-8 years ago. So I'm going to talk about all those things in relationship to this topic. And if you want to find me on the interwebs, you can find me at Tango Llama. Okay, so this is what we're going to cover in this talk. I'm going to do a couple minutes on like, why should you be spending your time thinking about this? I'm going to offer some background to help us set some context around this concept of a contributor-centric system. I'm going to offer up a definition if you haven't heard of a contributor-centric system before. If the concept is self-evident to you, I'm hopefully going to provide some more context around it. If it's a brand new concept to you, that would be partially because I made up the idea, or at least the term. And then we're going to walk through not just the definition, but 6 principles that I think help lead us towards thinking about how we build contributor-centric systems, like actually in our architecture. And then just 3 questions to consider as your own next steps. And then if we've got some time, we'll take questions. I actually am going to be in a chat session right after in the next hour for anyone that would like to be able to carry on this conversation in that setting as well. Okay, so quick point here. Why is this worth 40 minutes of your time? And I just want to drive at kind of three ideas here. First of all, getting better as software professionals. So regardless of whether you're a designer or an engineer, you work in product management, you work in the marketing space, becoming a better person that operates in your craft often involves growing just the amount of experiences you have through learning from others. I'm hopefully going to contribute something from my own experiences that can help influence some of your own craft. Second, this might help you now or in the future. You may not be operating right now in an open source project that is contributor driven, and it's worth noting in a circle of people that are all working in open source that I don't necessarily think every single open source project needs to be primarily oriented towards contribution. There are plenty of great projects that are primarily operating as just the transparency of operating in the open is the primary reason that they're out there, versus trying to drive a larger contributor base around the project. Obviously, contributors are always welcome, but it may not be the primary focus. But there's a good chance that you will be involved in a project like that at some point in the future. And perhaps some of the things that I'm going to talk about could be useful to you. And then last, this actually could be a little bit life influencing, life changing. I know thinking about some of these topics and trying to implement some of them have had a big effect on my career, not just like success or failure, but more importantly, like the way I approach my work on a day-to-day basis. And I hope that maybe there's something for you in that. So I think all those things sort of roll up into why being here could be valuable. Okay, so I'm going to talk in this background section around 4 ideas. So first, an anti-pattern that comes from my own background around learning management systems. This is not, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time trashing an industry. That's not the point. But to say that there are some things that maybe are not so contributor-centric about the way often enterprise software systems are built, and certainly when it comes to the learning space. And then I'm going to point to 3 experiences I've had that have shaped some of my own thinking about what these concepts might be. So I'm going to these first several minutes do a little bit of storytelling, and perhaps I'll hop out of my presentation and do some demos, but maybe we'll just stay right here. So my anti-pattern is kind of my enterprise LMS company experience, and then 3 different use cases where I've seen some of these concepts at play are here in these other ideas. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so first, the enterprise learning management space. And now I'm gonna crawl into the Wayback Machine of early part of my career, both 1999, 98, and then rolling into the early 2000s. I spent some time working in the enterprise learning space. There's obviously a lot that's changed, and maybe in some cases, maybe not changed as much in relationship to all the different vendors that happen to be involved in that particular space of delivering training. And one of the things I found in that work, which sort of, I'll say, caused me to start thinking about reorienting what I was doing with my career, was this notion that we had the capacity, through the fact that we were a system that's delivering training inside a large enterprise, to have a collaborative, contributor-centric effect in building features that not only would be focused on the learner, but also in what it means for learning to be a collaborative activity. And often those systems, of course, they're built more often for the buyer, right? So who's trying to justify the fact that we do have compliance issues, we need to deliver a certain amount of training, we've got to validate the fact that we did that, because my boss is asking me a question about what I did with the millions of dollars that are invested in my training program. And so here's this huge opportunity where we're interacting with a whole group of folks that actually could be a part of making the learning experience better, and often that's sort of like a secondary requirement. So that led into a shift in my career back in 2007, 2008, 2009 time period. And I quit my job where I was running engineering for a learning management company, and I went to go work for, at the time, my favorite charity. So I worked for an organization called Cure International that did work in majority world countries, where they operated a series of hospitals that were focused on caring for children who had surgically correctable conditions. And when I joined the organization, I was actually the first person who had any sort of technology title in the org, and then quickly kind of took over the marketing department as well. Over the next year or so, we had a really big challenge, which was if someone showed up with $50 or $50,000, we couldn't, we had really great statistics that talked about the fact that we were doing good things with your money. We couldn't actually connect it with anyone who was really being served, right? And so what we did is we built a technology platform that allowed us to tell the stories of people who were actually being served directly by the money that was flowing in from, in many cases, the United States and Europe, but also through grant organizations across the world, in order to have a truly transformational effect in the life of a child, where you're literally taking someone who was on a trajectory to be not only disaffected socioeconomically, but even like often culturally, because of a condition that was correctable. And so we use that platform to go ahead and like actually draw a connection between the person who was helping provide the care and then the person who was receiving the care, and then brokering that conversation in some really effective ways, and actually created a sense of real belonging inside the organization. That was kind of like my first interaction into like not just a marketing activity, but actually like thinking about like, what does it mean to actually build community around around something? How do you build a software system that allows people to feel directly connected to the work? And we eventually built out some really remarkable features, like the ability to send get well messages into the hospital. And then we had embedded bloggers that would carry those messages and then share secondary messages. And so broker the communication so everything's like appropriate, but ultimately create a greater sense of connection and belonging through a piece of software that was built, and through some of the ways we thought about designing it, and just the mechanics around the way the entire program operated. In the middle of working for that organization, I worked there for about almost 8 years. We ran into a challenge that actually led into my second example. And it was focused around electronic medical records. Now, there are plenty of open source EMR platforms that existed already, but we were actually focused on a really very specific use case, which was we built a platform that actually ultimately became a project called Hospital Run, that became the second application-based project, I think, behind Ghost, to ever join the JS Foundation. And so this project was actually like highly focused, not just on the issue of electronic medical records, but what did it mean to operate in an extremely low resource environment with variable connectivity. So wanting to take advantage of cloud technology, but in a scenario where connectivity wasn't reliable and certainly ubiquitous. And how could we build a solution that was easy enough for one motivated actor to get up and running in their environment and be able to carry medical records outside of a facility and interact, say, in a mobile clinic setting? Because one of the things we had found when working at Cure was that we would do this work where we would do long-term patient follow-up, 300 kilometers away from the primary facility where we were providing surgical care. And so we wanted to like build a system that made it possible to carry the records outside of the hospital, interact with patients, come back, have all that information automatically sync to a central server and to the cloud, and then do that in a way that was completely transparent. So we had a very focused need, and ended up extremely reluctantly, building our own open source project around this. And you can find out if you're interested. The project's still going on. I'm no longer one of the primary maintainers, but there's some fantastic work that's still going on if you go to hospitalrun.io. Highly recommend if that's something that's of interest to you, particularly if you're interested in things like offline enabled technologies. So there was so one of the things that we had to do in developing that project was we recognized that we were trying to get open source developers to contribute to a project that they weren't necessarily directly connected with on a day-to-day basis, right? This doesn't fall into their traditional workflow. And so what we had to do was actually bake into the way the systems were built some really clear ideas about how contributors were going to engage with the project. And this moved me on things like, there were some basic things that maybe like might be obvious around, a strong test coverage, so that if you submit a change, we had some verification of the fact that you as a contributor had some verification about whether or not anything you had done had sort of compromised the system. We also made specific technology choices. Like at the time, we chose Ember as the front-end framework because it was highly opinionated, and because it allowed developers to just say, well, I don't know as much about, say, the EMR space, but I do recognize clearly like how to work and build experiences in Ember. And so that sort of removed one of those issues that like could help people self-select. If you're an Ember developer and you're interested in doing this type of thing, then you might fit into this project. and then just really focusing the way we engaged with our contributor community around really like being as focused on them as we were on the problem. And so there were a lot of lessons that we learned through that process that ultimately roll up into some of the principles that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on in what it takes to build one of these systems. And then the third thing, so I came to work at New Relic back in 2018, and then I came in and took over the open source program in 2019. And so again, and here's another example where I got a chance to explore some ideas around what does it mean to like build systems that invite contribution. So the whole growth of the open source program office in New Relic was a brand new concept. Not that open source, there have been plenty of things that have been source available in the organization, and there have been some things that were in our open source GitHub, but really building some sort of like strategy and sense in the organization around what does it mean for us to represent ourselves to the market, to our customers, to potential contributors, to people that are interested in what's going on in the observability space. How do we find the others and start to build a sense of community and contribution? And how do we even inside our own organization start to turn conversations in the engineering space and the field engineering space around what it means for all of us to operate as a community, not just delivering individual pieces of technology, but how do we actually work together under one banner of what we're doing with open source at New Relic? And one of the results of that was a lot of the architecture that was baked into the way we delivered our open source website. So if you go to opensource.newrelic.com, you'll see back a few months ago, we launched this new website. And a lot of the things that are baked into that system were all focused on what it would mean to both recruit internal and external to the product organization contribution towards things like the cataloging of all our projects and continuing to stay up to date with what things are available for open source at New Relic. And so that looked like some things like the architecture that we chose, where it was a static site generated, Gatsby architecture, where we had some really clear documentation and interfaces around what it took to like include an additional project into our library of projects that were available on the site. What kind of things we provided as the open source program office in order to make that experience easy, as well as offer you recognition by participating in that, and then creating a real sense of openness and invitation in the way even the site was constructed. So every single page has got an edit button, or you've got the ability to log an issue against a specific subsection of the site, in order to open up the sense that yes, we want to have our product teams, we want to have our field engineering teams contributing to this, but ultimately we want to start to engage in a conversation with our customers about what it means for us to do this work together. So all those things kind of like roll up into experiences that all land on this concept of a contributor-centric system. So I want to talk for just a couple minutes about some common ground that I've discovered over the last 10 plus years of working around what open source projects and nonprofits tend to have in common with each other when it comes to this topic of a contributor-centric system. So first of all, both open source projects and nonprofits very often tend to be pursuing a larger goal than any full-time or central staff can achieve, right? So one may in some case be like, say, a human service or concerned with environmental issues, both of which are challenges that like, there will never be a situation where even the most well-resourced nonprofit organization could achieve that. And certainly when it comes to an ambitious open source project that is seeking contribution, that baked into that is this idea that like the problem's bigger than we can do on our own. So as a result of that, you're reliant on participation with a circle of people where financial benefit is not the primary driver. And that's not to say that there's no financial benefit in the case of maybe either one of these. There are some scenarios, with things like GitHub sponsors and stuff where people, of course, can be in some way compensated for open source contribution, although obviously like not at the same level maybe that exists like in commercial roles. You could be working for a company where it is your primary job to do open source contribution. But the primary folks that you're working with in an awful lot of these spaces, it's not the real primary reason why someone's engaged. And that's certainly the case in the nonprofit space as well. You may, get a tax write-off or something like for giving to a cause, but that's not the reason that someone decides to give you money. And then the third thing, they both have missions that tend to be best served by a broader circle, right? So nonprofits build a community around a cause, and then they hopefully are trying to build relationships with their contributors that are bigger than just sort of like a transactional activity. The same sort of thing in the case of a really healthy and well-functioning open source project. You're seeking to build a broader circle, and therefore they need vibrant relationships with contributors. They need to have like leveling, ongoing, not only ongoing communication, but like an ongoing deepening with those who are interested and enrolled in that journey to build a greater connection. So I want to talk about this definition. So with all those experiences, is sort of some of that common ground. What are the things that actually make up a contributor-centric system? This is a definition I want to explore. So a contributor-centric system is a system, a technology or related processes built to support and align people who are in a sustained relationship with an organization that champions a mission. The resulting system enables a virtuous cycle of mutual service to a common cause. So this is a scenario where the driver of a contributor-centric system is to move your contributors from feeling that they're giving to a cause to becoming a part of it through their participation. So what does this look like just practically, this sort of relationship between the contributor and the organization around a mission? In a nonprofit, this might look like a platform that moves the charitable conversation from what you as the nonprofit are doing that supports a specific population or a particular cause to what we are collectively doing. And so how do we build technology systems that help the people that are, say, contributing financially or with their time to feel like I'm not just doing something for you, I'm doing something with you, I'm actually a part of you. And for us, when I was working at Cure, that rolled into places where not only were we letting you see what was happening with your money, we were actually actively having you participate in some of the whole person care that was going on in, again, like an appropriate and really extremely beneficial ways to the people that were being served and to the people that were contributing to that work. And then in the open source space, this is building projects and tooling and processes that encourage maintainers to increase the efforts to engage contributors in an ever-growing sustainable connection towards that shared service. So again, we're talking about focusing on open source projects that recognize not only their need to, say, like grow a couple additional maintainers, but to really build a broader constituency of folks that are interested on various levels of contributing directly to the work and building common cause around that. And how do we build systems that make it possible for contributors to feel more and more a part of what we're doing, and that they're working with us and leveling up in their own participation and engagement with the project. So thinking about that definition and focusing on like both some of the things that I've personally learned working in the open source space, as well as learned working in the nonprofit world. I want to offer up 6 principles to consider for conversation, either here in this call or in the chat later on, for creating a mission-aligned experience that invites contribution. So here's starting with number 1. Remember who we're serving and why. This is one of the things that's really valuable that I've found in building systems that invite contribution, that have been successful in onboarding more contribution to them, is being super clear about the primary customer. So even though you're building a system through this technology platform, through the program that's based around it, towards a secondary customer, someone who is not the primary beneficiary of what you're doing. So like in the case of a nonprofit, you may be serving, say, a child who needs care, a person who needs food services, but ultimately you're building the system really for the contributor. But it's really important to remember collectively, what is the mission about and who are you serving and why? And that is so, so crucial. It's very often, particularly in the nonprofit space, people can kind of get those primary, secondary customer issues misaligned, and it actually can erode what your contributor, your ability to like build out a real community around contribution. In the case of the hospital run project, we were super clear at the beginning. So this picture was actually taken. This was one of the things that inspired us to build the project. I was going on a mobile clinic with a group of physicians from the Cure Hospital in Kenya. And this is doctors that are loading up a bunch of patient records to sit on top of an ambulance so we can drive 300 kilometers away and go see 400 kids that day and try to identify which ones we could do something for at a future surgical case or potentially someone who we were going to see for long-term follow-up. And that made it super clear. We are here to serve a very specific use case of folks that are serving in extremely low resource environments and who have the need to be able to carry records in lots of different contexts, but still want to get all the benefit of cloud technology. What we were building as Hospital Run had a beautiful user interface on top of it. There was just some fantastic work that was done. A lot of interest to like do lots of different things with the project. And that was fine. It's an open source project. It's always possible to fork something, but ultimately what we were there for was to serve that case. And that actually created the ability to align and find people who wanted to serve that case. So just super clear to remember who you're serving and why, and be clear about that, which is actually what number 2 is about, is communicating the mission clearly. So this is there's a couple sort of like maybe counterintuitive points in some of these principles. One of them is conviction in the mission invites contribution. So a lot of times when you're involved in, say, a charitable cause, or you've got a sort of like the germ of an idea around a project, there's a natural inclination to kind of see where the interest comes from and cast a broader net. I would just say that in my experience, when it comes to building systems that people want to contribute to, actually more conviction in what this thing is for is more beneficial. You can always, you can always, as I said, like fork a project and go take it a different direction. And we celebrate that. We actually had that happen with Hospital Run with, a totally different use case that someone wanted to be able to take it off on. But ultimately, like, you're looking for people to buy in on that mission. And so if you communicate that clearly and you do it with conviction, I mean, not with like aggressiveness, right? But like ultimately with conviction around who we're serving and why, and what we're trying to do with this project, I've found that it's actually more beneficial towards recruiting contributors. Number 3, you want to create norms with options, right? So we want to create the sense of like, when people join this community, this is the thing that they do. Again, this might seem a little counterintuitive. You think that like everyone wants options. They want to do what they want to do. And I would say, yes, they do, but only after they know what people normally do here. So create norms in the way, not only, this can look like, obviously, like things that we consider standard, like a code of conduct in your open source project. But it also involves things like what types of first contributions really are the types of things that people do, and getting really smart about maybe how you're using that good first issue tag in an open source project. But to set the expectation, like, there is a thing that we do, and this is how people normally find success engaging with us. In the case of a nonprofit setting, it's about like giving norms, right? Again, like, you might think it's counterintuitive to think that someone wants to be told what to do in this scenario. I promise you it's true. Like, they want to be told what people normally do, and they want the ability to make a choice about what they are going to do after that. But like, after you've sort of established the fact that there is normative behavior in the way the community tends to operate in this project, doing that obviously in a generous way. 4th, contributor engagement is a primary requirement. So one of the things you want to do as you're thinking about building out your architecture, building out your design, building out like the mechanics of your program, think about where are the opportunities to bake a sense of openness and welcome to the mission in that part of the user experience. And one of the things we did, we were overly engaged, maybe not overly, because I think it was actually really helpful, but in the case of the hospital room project, in really like direct personal connection in the process of walking someone along in the contribution activity. And so you can if you treat your interactions as an opportunity to invite contributors, and you're clear about your mission, like those previous things that I highlighted. Now you're creating some really clear on-ramps for someone to decide, like, I want to be a part of this team. I want to be a part of what's going on with this project, with this cause. And I believe that I've got something to offer to it. Sixth, we want to make experiences personal. Often, I think, especially as a software professional, there's a mistake or an over-rotation where we sort of use the robots to sort of like eliminate the humans. And I would say in the best case scenarios of a contributor-centric system, what you actually do is you use the technology to enhance the human connection. So sure, we can use automated processes in order to make it easy to execute things that everyone needs to be able to do in being a part of this project. But ultimately, you want to create some spaces where that direct person-to-person interaction does occur, and that it feels richer and has more context associated with it, more than just meeting a stranger, but like meeting someone who's now kind of opted into the pathway, the way people tend to operate inside this project. Again, one of the things I point to is when I worked at Cure, we built this messaging system that made it directly possible to, like, from a case, send a get well message into the hospital. And it wasn't just some corny, marketing ploy. It was genuinely valuable to the folks that were serving in the hospital, and to the people that received the messages, parents and children who were just gratified with the fact that someone would reach out from the other side of the world and say, that they hope that their child's getting better. And so we use those opportunities to actually, and then, usher the communication back and forth in order to like create this moment for people where they recognize, I really am a part of this. And so we use the technology to do that. And so technology should enable the person-to-person interaction. And then last point here, and this is where a lot of efforts, particularly when they're scaling, I think I've noticed, tend to lose their way, is that relationships are primary incentive. So often you'll find this happens very, very often in mass marketing, nonprofit fundraising programs, that they kind of become incentive focused. And incentives are great. Like, incentives are useful things to help people kind of like take the step over to like decide to be engaged. Like sending someone a t-shirt for contributing code that gets checked into your project is a great thing to do. But it's not about the t-shirt. Like, people can get t-shirts anywhere, right? Like, it's about the identity, the fact that I'm now a part of this thing. And so if what you're offering ultimately as the incentive is relationship, the identity with the project, the building into like, I'm a part of this community, and part of what it means to be a part of this community might have something to do with like a physical piece of merch that I've got a hold of. It's not the sort of thing that can be purchased. It actually has to be, it has to be earned. And so I want to encourage you to think about the fact that like those incentives, there's nothing wrong with the fact that you build an incentive program into your contribution model. But ultimately, if someone's doing something just so they can get a t-shirt or just so they can get like a CD, we used to do it all the time in the nonprofit space, you'd like get a CD or something, or I don't know, a band something. They're like, that's not the point. You just transacted business with someone, where what you really want to do is use the relationship as the incentive, and then use, say, some physical item as just the indicator of the fact that the relationship's there. So anyway, those are the 6 principles that I wanted to be able to walk through here. So in closing, and then we'll have just a few minutes for questions. I just want to encourage, here's 3, and I'll post these slides there's a Slack channel I'm going to post like for later on for kind of post the event. Next steps, 3 questions to ask and answer on the journey to creating a contributor-centric system. Okay, item number 1, in whatever project you're engaged with, are we communicating an opportunity that invites engagement? What is it about the way you talk about your project, the way you talk about your cause, that invites someone to not just admire the fact that it's being done, but engage with the work? How do you paint someone show someone a picture of a story of how their engagement actually can be a part of making the cause that you're pursuing with your project or with your organization more successful. 2, what features can you build and implement to invite contributors to grow in their direct participation? So whether that's recognizing that, what we're trying to do is grow the body of knowledge around a particular thing, and therefore your questions and answers might be relevant, or are there features that we can actually just build into the workflow of, say, the way someone's contributing to the project or getting involved with the cause that would make it possible for me to feel like I am directly participating in what I'm doing. Those are the things that I'd encourage you, go think about how that could have an effect on your work. And the third thing is, how can we use technology to enhance and sustain person-to-person interaction? So obviously that person-to-person connection is so valuable. Your time's the only thing you can't get more of. So it is the most valuable asset you're dealing with any of these efforts. And so rather than squeezing out all that person-to-person interaction, how do you find ways to make it possible for that person-to-person interaction to be more rich? How can you use technology to sort of make the robots do the things that everyone can do, but then still allow people to know one another through the work that they're doing? That's going to build the type of connection with the cause that ultimately can lead towards sustained contribution. And with that, I'm gonna I've listed the fact that the New Relic users Slack has got a specialized channel called Contributor-Centric Systems, which you can go ahead and join the New Relic user Slack. We can talk about this more there. But also, I'm going to be in a chat session in the next hour if anyone would like to just be able to async, communicate about this further. But I'd be also happy, because we've got a few minutes left, to be able to take any questions that anyone has. I've got here, open question from Danielle Gellis. You mentioned that you should offer a sense of belonging and voicing the mission. Any tips of doing that? Yeah, so I think it's I think that you can draw some really good edges around, let's say if you're working in a particular open source project. I don't think that inviting participation necessarily means that everything we're doing is up for debate, conversation. But I think you can look for opportunities, if you're in a long running project and you're pursuing, say, a new stream of work, either a new feature, maybe an architecture, a new architecture direction. Is there a space where community contribution in the solutioning could be valuable? I would generally say that that leadership's not crowdsourced, but that leadership shouldn't feel threatened by the input of everyone who has got a real passion and value in the mission, ultimately what you're trying to accomplish. So how can you find a space, say, to communicate, here's what the vision is, we're going to accomplish thing X. Maybe here are 2 different directions we're considering. We would we'd like to invite engaged conversation, in a venue that's going to work for your community. That may be in a discussion thread. It may be that you're going to do something in the Slack board. But I'd say that might be the right kind of place to think about doing that from a open source project perspective. That can give people some voice and belonging in the mission. I also think too, things like having exclusive kind of tribal identity content, or or swag, is not a bad thing, right? If it's something earned, then it does give people a sense that I'm actually a part of the thing. So hopefully, Danielle, if I didn't answer your question, I'm happy to chat about it more a little bit later on, but thanks for asking the question. Brittany is asking here, she says, thanks for the comment about the topic. I'm curious how one might create or define normative behavior in the early stage of a project where there are not many contributors yet. Would you recommend defining norms, even if those norms don't technically exist yet, or wait for the project to pick up some steam before identifying norms? Yeah, so good question. Like, I think some of them are early stage of a project. There's easy stuff to do. You can make sure you've got a code of conduct. And you can be thoughtful about the way you implement that code, like not in ways that value people, not only value that people value other people, but the way you engage with people who maybe you feel like might have like broken the code. And then secondarily, I think that if you know there are like particular technical standards around like the way you want to see work done, I think you can start implementing those early. And then be thoughtful about like communicating the fact that like there are norms, and be honest about like the worst thing you can do is pretend like you're like in a more advanced state than you actually are. I think the vulnerability of like saying, we want there to be standards, these are the standards we're implementing, and being really clear about just this, maybe a small document where you kind of highlight those things for someone who's interested, or maybe respond to them if they've got questions. I think you can start there and then let them grow with you, right? I think it's like classic to like maybe over-engineer something in the early stage. You don't want to, but you can set some real standards about like what you can offer, like cultural values in the way the project's being conducted at the beginning, by even really highlighting the fact that there are norms, that there are things that we've tried to do. We'd like you to try to do those as well. You can kind of couch them in that language in the early stage, and I think that can be helpful. And again, Brittany, if that's helpful to you, if that was a good answer to the question, great. And if not, I am happy to chat about it more, either now or in the next session. Are there any other questions? Oh, I've got one more question here. Any idea how these concepts could translate within a team in a workplace? Would love to create a more collaborative culture within my workplace's development team. Yeah. Thank you, anonymous attendee. Yeah, I'm going to imagine, if you're familiar with the concept, maybe you're not familiar with the concept of like inner source, like the notion of like sort of like driving more of a contributor focused or open source culture inside an existing organization. I think that there are some norms you can set about the way you have to lead by example. I guess that's the first thing I'd say. Like, so I work in a larger organization where like we haven't always necessarily done everything in open source. There've been some groups that certainly have been more open, some that have not. And so one of the things that we try to do in the engineering team that I run is foster a sense of openness in the way we're conducting our work, which is not just about the fact that the code's out there, you can go look at it in GitHub, or look at it in maybe in some cases our private GitHub enterprise instance, but we're communicating on a regular basis in public forums. Like in our case, it happens to be like a project Slack channel for a big thing that we're doing right now. We're making all the artifacts, everything that we're doing very clear. And every time we post one of those things, we're inviting there to be engagement with anybody who's, say, lurking or on the periphery of the project who might be interested in engaging further. And I know, like, sometimes there can be a fear that, like, if you open that door, it's like a Pandora's box. You can always close it. Like, you can always, like, shrink the aperture of, like, how much feedback you're getting later on. But I think, like, if you're trying to, like, change culture, it's better to maybe overcorrect a little bit and try to, like, actually open up that conversation more in the early stage.
Pardon the interruption. I just want to say that there's 1 minute left.
Oh, yeah, great. Yeah. So we've got last here. Let's see. I've got 2 more questions here, and I don't actually think like I'm going to totally have the chance to be able to answer them. But Josh and Lisa, I would be happy to talk with both of you in the chat session that's going to happen just in 15 minutes. And so I'll finish up here just by saying, like, thank you so much to everyone for taking the opportunity to be here, be a part of this talk. Just really grateful for your attention and your time. And I hope that you have a great rest of the conference, and that you would engage with me or others further about this concept. I think that there's something to be learned here. I think I'm in the process of learning something, and I'd love to learn from you. So that's it. And just want to say, hope you have a great rest of your day, and thanks for being a part of All Things Open.